The receptionist slid the price list across the marble desk with both hands, smiled her most diplomatic smile, and told Dean Martin he might be more comfortable at a hotel down the street, and the 11 people in that lobby went so quiet you could hear the chandelier above the bar make its faint electrical hum. Wait, because what happened in the next 4 minutes wasn't what anyone in that room expected, and the reason Dean didn't do what he could have done says more about who he actually was than anything he ever recorded. It was October 1962, a Tuesday. The light outside was fading the way Los Angeles light fades in autumn, slowly and without apology, turning the street beyond the glass doors the color of old copper. The lobby of the Carrington had a particular kind of quiet on weekday evenings. Not empty, never quite empty, but settled, like a room that had learned to breathe at a certain pace and expected everyone who entered to match it. Crystal chandeliers threw soft pools of gold across the marble floor. The bar to the left was doing slow, measured business. A retired film producer named Gerald sat in one of the deep velvet chairs near the window, waiting for his car, reading nothing, watching everything the way men who'd spent 40 years in the industry always watched rooms, cataloging, weighing, filing away. 2 women from New York, sisters, were standing near the elevator with their luggage, finishing a conversation that had clearly been going on for 3 days. A bellman named Reuben was parked near the brass luggage rack, doing what bellmen do when there's nothing to carry, existing with maximum stillness, waiting for something to move. The man who came through those doors at 6:10 didn't announce himself. He came in the way tired people come into places they've come into before, not looking around to establish the room, just moving through it toward the thing he needed, which was a key and a bed, and 4 hours of silence before the world started asking things of him again. He was wearing a light jacket, open at the collar, no tie, dark trousers that had seen a full day's use. He carried a single leather overnight bag, medium-sized, the kind you pack when you know exactly how long you're staying and exactly what you need. His hat was in his hand, rather than on his head. He crossed to the front desk. Behind that desk stood Carol Marsh, 24 years old, 8 months into the job, originally from Cincinnati, currently pursuing an acting career with the focused, slightly desperate energy of someone who's decided that this is the thing and is going to make it work no matter what. She was good at her job. She was precise. She was warm. She managed difficult guests with a calm that her manager, Mr. Holt, had noted approvingly in her last review. She had also been trained, carefully and repeatedly, to protect the Carrington from what Mr. Holt called misaligned expectations. Guests who made reservations without fully understanding the rates. Guests who arrived expecting one thing and received the invoice for another. The uncomfortable checkout conversations that nobody wanted. Part of her job, as it had been explained to her, was to identify those situations early and redirect them gracefully. She looked at the man who had just placed his overnight bag on the floor beside the desk. She made an assessment. It took less than 2 seconds. She would think about those 2 seconds for years. He was older, somewhere in his 50s, she guessed. Though she'd learn later she was off. He was not wearing a suit. He was not wearing cufflinks or a watch that announced itself. His jacket was good but not conspicuous. He looked like someone's father or someone's uncle, a man who had come a long way and wasn't interested in performing anything for anybody. "Good evening," Carol said, her smile precise and professional. "Welcome to the Carrington. Do you have a reservation with us?" "I do," he said. "Name's Martin." Carol ran her finger down the page of the reservation ledger. She found the entry immediately. 2 nights, standard room, confirmed 6 days ago under D. Martin. She looked at it. She looked at him again. She made a decision. It was the same decision she had made, in various forms, perhaps a dozen times in 8 months. It had never gone wrong before. She would think about that too. He had a recording session the next morning at 8. Capitol Records. Studio B, Vine Street. The musicians were booked. The arranger was flying in from New York, and the session cost more per hour than most people earned in a week. He needed to be checked in, showered, fed, and asleep within the next 2 hours. He was not going to spend those 2 hours at the front desk of the Carrington, explaining himself to anyone. That was the plan. That was the reasonable, simple plan. "Mr. Martin," she said, keeping her voice pleasant, leaning forward slightly in the way she'd practiced, the way that said, "I'm being helpful, not judgmental. Before we proceed with your check-in, I want to make sure you have all the information you need about our rates. The Carrington is a luxury property, and I find that sometimes guests aren't fully aware of our pricing until they arrive." The man looked at her. He didn't say anything. "Our standard rooms begin at $480 per night," Carol continued, "with taxes and service fees. Your 2-night stay will come to just over $1,100. I want to make sure that's what you're expecting, so there are no surprises at checkout." Across the lobby, Gerald lowered his reading glasses half an inch, not enough to seem like he was watching. He was absolutely watching. Reuben the bellman had gone from maximum stillness to a different kind of stillness. The kind that means something has caught your attention, and you are deciding whether to act on it. "I understand the rate," the man said. "I'd like to check in." Carol nodded slowly. She had been here before. Sometimes people said they understood the rate and then had a very different reaction when the invoice arrived. She was trying to help. "Of course," she said. "I just want to confirm. You're comfortable with the $1,100 total? Because I should also mention there are some excellent options nearby that offer wonderful value. The Balmoral on Sunset is very well regarded, and I believe their standard rooms are around $160 a night, considerably more accessible." A beat. The word accessible hung in the air of the lobby, the way certain words do, technically neutral, actually not neutral at all. The man placed both hands flat on the marble desk. Not aggressively, just placed them there, quietly, the way you place something down when you want to be very deliberate about what you say next. "The Balmoral," he said. "Yes, it's just, is it because of the jacket?" Carol's smile held. "Barely. I'm sorry. The jacket. The no-tie situation. Is that what's telling you I should be at the Balmoral?" "Mr. Martin, I'm not making any judgment about—" "You slid a price list at me," he said, not angry, almost amused. "You told me about the Balmoral. You said accessible. Those are judgments. They're just polite ones." The two women from New York had stopped their conversation. One of them had her hand on the elevator button, but wasn't pressing it. Gerald had put his reading glasses in his jacket pocket. Reuben had taken one quiet step to the left, which put him at a slightly better angle to see the front desk. Carol could feel the lobby. She had a performer's sensitivity to a room. She'd always had it. It was part of why she'd come to Los Angeles. And she could feel that the room had reorganized itself around this desk, around this conversation, in the past 90 seconds. The air had changed quality somehow. The faint smell of cigarette smoke from the bar, the warm beeswax of the lobby candles, the cold marble under everyone's hands, all of it suddenly sharper, more present, the way familiar smells become vivid when something unexpected happens in a room. Look at what's happening here. Because this is the part the story usually skips. He had 1 hour and 40 minutes before he needed to be asleep. He had a session in the morning that couldn't move. And he was standing at this desk, both hands flat on the marble, choosing very carefully what to do next. "I apologize if I've caused any offense," she said, her voice still controlled. "I'm simply trying to ensure our guests have a complete picture. I made a reservation 6 days ago," he said, "by telephone. The rate was quoted to me then. I confirmed it. I drove here from Burbank. I've been in a recording studio since 7 this morning, and I would very much like to check in. Of course, I'll just need to... The door to the back office opened. Thomas Holt, the general manager of the Carrington, had been at his desk reviewing the next month's event calendar when his phone rang. It was Robert at the concierge desk, and Robert had said 3 words before Thomas was already standing up. "You should come." Thomas came through the door, registered the lobby in one practiced sweep. Gerald, the New York sisters, Reuben, the other guests who had slowly, naturally, gravitationally oriented toward the front desk, and then he registered who was standing at the front desk, and his face did something that Carol had never seen it do before. Thomas Holt had managed luxury hotels for 22 years. He was not a man who lost his composure. He was not a man who moved quickly across a lobby. He was doing both of those things right now. He reached the desk, glanced at the clock on the wall behind Carol. It read 6:23, and understood with the clarity of a man who had spent 2 decades reading rooms, that whatever had happened in the last 13 minutes was going to require his full and immediate attention. "Mr. Martin," Thomas said, arriving slightly out of breath, which was something Carol had never witnessed in 8 months, and would never witness again. "Robert called me. I should have been out here." He looked at the desk, at Carol, at the expression on Dean's face, and assembled the picture in approximately 2 seconds. He looked down at the reservation ledger, still open on the desk from Carol's earlier check. He turned it so Carol could see it from her side. The entry read, D. Martin, standard room, 2 nights, and below the standard booking information in the column reserved for guest notes. In handwriting she recognized as Robert's from the concierge desk. Preferred guest, 19 stays since 1954. Minority investor, ownership group, 1957. Notify GM. On arrival. See standing file. 19 stays. Since 1954. Carol looked at the number. She looked at the man in the jacket. She looked at Thomas Holt's face, which was the color of the marble desk. She understood, in a single cascading moment, approximately 11 things simultaneously. The lobby had gone completely quiet, not the settled quiet of a Tuesday evening. The held breath quiet of 11 people who are watching something they did not expect to watch tonight, and are not going to forget. "Carol," Thomas said quietly, "do you know who this is?" She did. She did now. Standing here with the ledger open between them and the lobby listening, and her face doing something she had no control over. She had seen him in photographs, in magazines, on television. She had simply not the jacket, the no tie, the single overnight bag, the tiredness, the Tuesday evening ordinariness of his arrival. She had simply not Dean Martin, she said. It came out at approximately half the volume she intended. Dean said nothing. Thomas drew a breath. "Mr. Martin has been a guest of the Carrington since before either of us worked here," he said to Carol, with a precision that was worse than any shout. "He is, as Robert's notes indicate, one of our most valued and longest-standing guests. He is also an investor in this hotel's ownership group, has been since 1957. He turned to Dean. "I am deeply sorry for any inconvenience. Your room is ready. Please allow me to personally..." "Thomas," Dean said. Thomas stopped. Dean looked at Carol. She was waiting. Everyone was waiting. Gerald in his chair had his hands folded in his lap like a man watching the final scene of a film he's been watching for 2 hours, completely still, not wanting to miss a word. Reuben the bellman would later tell his wife that he had not breathed for approximately 40 seconds. The New York sisters had given up entirely on the elevator. Dean picked up his overnight bag from the floor. He set it on the desk, not because he needed to, but because it gave him something to do with his hands for a moment. Then he looked at Carol and said, "Next time, ask first." 4 words. That was it. Not, "Do you know who I am?" Not a lecture about appearances or dignity, or the danger of judging books by their covers. Not the gracious extended speech of a man performing his own graciousness for an audience. Just 4 words. Quiet enough that the New York sisters near the elevator might not have caught them if the room hadn't been so completely, utterly silent. Ask first. Carol would think about those 4 words for the rest of her career. She would think about them when she became a shift manager, and then a front-of-house director, and then years later when she stood in front of a classroom for the first time and realized she had something worth teaching. She would think about them every single time she looked at someone who walked through a door and felt the first flicker of an assumption forming in her mind. Ask first. Not don't judge. Not appearances are deceiving. Just the practical, unglamorous, actually useful instruction. Before you redirect someone to the Balmoral, ask them what they need. Thomas Holt collected himself with visible effort and processed the check-in with his own hands, which was not a thing that general managers did, and which everyone in the lobby noticed. He slid the key across the desk without a word. Gerald rose from his chair as Dean picked up the key and turned toward the elevator, and he said, without calculating it, without meaning to perform anything, "Good evening, Mr. Martin." Dean looked at him. Gerald. They knew each other. Of course, they knew each other. Gerald would tell the story at dinner 3 nights later, and his wife would say, of course they knew each other, in the tone of someone who was not surprised. And Gerald would say, that's not the point. And his wife would say, then what is the point? And Gerald would be quiet for a moment and say, he could have buried her. 3 sentences and she'd have been finished. Instead, he gave her the only 4 words she actually needed. The elevator doors opened. Dean stepped in, turned around, pressed the button for the 4th floor. His face in the closing gap of the elevator doors was calm and tired, and not particularly interested in being observed. The doors closed. Notice what happened next in the lobby, because this is the part that people who weren't there don't fully believe when they hear the story. The room did not immediately resume. It stayed quiet for another 10-15 seconds. Not awkwardly, not with the frozen quality of shock, but with something more like the silence after a piece of music ends, and you're not quite ready to go back to the world yet. Then Gerald went back to waiting for his car. The New York sisters pressed the elevator button. Reuben returned to his post by the luggage rack. The bar resumed its quiet business. 4 floors up, the elevator opened onto a carpeted corridor, and Dean walked to room 412 with his overnight bag and his key, and nothing else on his mind that needed to be there. Thomas Holt walked back to his office, closed the door, and sat at his desk for 3 minutes without doing anything, which was also something nobody had ever seen him do. He came back out and found Carol at the front desk, doing her job, which required more composure than Thomas would have credited her with, though he would later revise upward his assessment of her considerably. I'm not going to put this in your file, he told her quietly. What I am going to do is ask you to think about why you do what you do, and whether the thing you think you're doing, protecting the guest, managing expectations, is actually the thing you're doing, or whether it's something else with a professional-sounding name. Carol nodded. Her face was very still. He's been coming here since 1954, Thomas said. 19 times. Never complained once. Tipped every person on this staff. At Christmas. 2 years ago, when the kitchen ran late on a banquet, he went back there personally and told the cooks they were doing a great job, because he'd seen the look on their faces and didn't want them to carry it through the night. He has also been a minority investor in this property since 1957, which means, in a very literal sense, he has partial ownership of the desk you're standing behind. Thomas paused. He came in tired on a Tuesday in a jacket, and you sent him to the Balmoral. He let that sit for a moment, and then walked away. Stop here for a second, because the next part is the part people get wrong when they tell this story. They frame it as Dean Martin being gracious or patient or saintly. That's not quite what it was. Wait, because here's what nobody mentions when they tell this story. The The part about what it cost Dean Martin to do what he did, which was almost nothing, which was exactly as hard as it sounds. He had a session in 14 hours. He'd gotten his key, the reasonable thing. The thing any tired person does was to go upstairs and stop thinking about the lobby. And that is exactly what he did. But somewhere between the lobby and room 412, he understood something about why he'd handled it the way he had. He was 45 years old and had been famous for long enough that the famous part had stopped being interesting. He had been recognized and not recognized, and recognized wrong, mistaken for someone else, mistaken for nobody, treated like a god, and treated like an inconvenience. Enough times that his relationship with all of it had become something close to weather. You didn't argue with it. You dressed appropriately and got on with things. What he had learned, in the way that people learn things not by being taught them, but by simply accumulating enough instances, was that the moment you reveal who you are to win an argument, you've already lost something that matters more than the argument. The leverage of a name is a one-time instrument. You use it and then it's used, and something shifts in the room that doesn't shift back. He had watched men do it, watched them drop their name like a card on a table, watched the room comply, watched the small dull victory of it, and he had always felt, afterward, a faint second-hand exhaustion. Ask first. That was the whole thing. It cost nothing. It assumed nothing. It left the other person their dignity, and it left you yours, and it moved the situation forward without burning anything down. He had a shower, ordered room service, was asleep by 9:30. The session earlier that day had gone well. For what it was worth, a full day in the studio. 3 songs he was genuinely happy with, which was not a thing that happened every day. He'd driven the 40 minutes from Burbank to Beverly Hills thinking about one of the chord progressions, not about the jacket or the overnight bag, or what anyone in any lobby was going to make of him, because why would he? That was before the Carrington, before Carol Marsh, before the price list on the marble desk. None of that had been part of the plan for the evening. None of it had been particularly difficult. He checked out Thursday morning. He tipped the bellman, nodded to the doorman, said goodbye to Robert at the concierge desk, who had worked at the Carrington for 11 years and considered himself a reliable reader of character and had no notes. Carol was not at the front desk Thursday morning. She was on the early shift and had clocked out at 7. But when he passed the desk, he left an envelope with the morning receptionist, a man named Frank, who'd been there 3 years and knew exactly who he was, and managed not to make a thing of it. The envelope had Carol's name on it, and inside was a piece of the Carrington notepad paper with 2 lines on it, in handwriting, that was neat and slightly cramped, the handwriting of someone who'd spent more of his life talking than writing. It said, "You've got good instincts. Point them in the right direction." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Terrell kept the note. She has it still, or so the story goes, in a drawer in a house in the valley, next to a photograph of her daughter and a letter from her mother. She's been meaning to answer for 2 years. She left the hotel industry in 1965, not for acting but for teaching, hospitality management, first at a community college, then at a proper university program, where she eventually ran the front-of-house curriculum for 11 years. She tells the story in her first lecture every semester, to rooms full of students who are 22, and certain they already understand people, and she tells it without making herself too much the villain, or Dean too much the saint, because that's not what it was. Remember this, because it's the part that matters most. She doesn't tell the story as a story about a famous person. She tells it as a story about 2 seconds. The 2 seconds it took her to make an assessment, and what those 2 seconds cost her, and what it took to unlearn them. It was a Tuesday, the tired man in a jacket. 4 words that cost nothing and changed everything. The Carrington is still there. Different name now, different ownership, renovated twice. The marble desk is gone, replaced with something sleeker that Mr. Holt, who retired in 1979, never cared for when he saw it in the photographs. The ledger is gone too, digitized somewhere into a system that doesn't leave space for handwritten notes in the margin. But if you stand in that lobby on a Tuesday evening in October, when the light outside is turning the color of old copper and the chandeliers are throwing their soft gold across the floor, you might find yourself thinking about what it costs to assume and what it costs to ask, and which of those two things you've been doing more of lately. The answer, for most of us, is not the one we'd prefer. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. And if you want to hear about the night Dean Martin walked into a different kind of room, one where the person waiting for him wasn't a receptionist but someone considerably more dangerous, and where 4 words would not have been nearly enough, leave a comment. That's a story worth telling too.